So that's the Iron Lady they flew in. Looks more like my grandmother's bridge partner. Captain Evan Keller kept his voice low. A conspiratorial murmur meant only for Lieutenant Chen, but in the sterile quiet of the CF, the words carried. Several junior officers nearby shifted, their smirks barely suppressed. They saw what Keller saw, a woman who had to be in her late 60s, maybe even early 70s, sitting alone at the edge of the massive briefing table. Her gray hair was cut in a sensible, no-fuss style, and she wore a simple navy pantsuit that looked like it had been purchased sometime during the Reagan administration. It was clean, pressed, but utterly out of place among the crisp digital camouflage and flight suits that filled the room. She held a porcelain mug of coffee in both hands, her gaze fixed on the blank projection screen at the front of the room, seemingly oblivious to the currents of youthful arrogance swirling around her. She was an anomaly, a relic in a room dedicated to the cutting edge of modern warfare. Gunnery Sergeant Walsh, standing near the back with his arms crossed, heard the captain's remark perfectly. Unlike the lieutenants, he didn't smile. His eyes, accustomed to seeing things others missed, narrowed slightly. He wasn't looking at her clothes or her age. He was looking at her posture. While everyone else in the room fidgeted, tapped pens, or shifted their weight, she sat with a stillness that was almost unnerving. Her back was perfectly straight, not touching the chair. It wasn't the rigid posture of discomfort. It was the ingrained, effortless alignment of someone whose spine had been trained to be a pillar. He watched her lift the mug to her lips. Her hands were steady, not a tremor to be seen. The skin on her knuckles was thin and networked with fine lines, but there was a density to them, a subtle thickness that spoke of a lifetime of use that didn't involve shuffling cards. He'd seen hands like that on old infantrymen, on riggers, on men who had spent decades mastering their tools. It was a quiet, unassuming competence held within the very structure of her body. The joke about her call sign, Iron Lady, had been making the rounds all morning. To Keller and his peers, it sounded like a cruel piece of irony, a nickname given by some desk-bound bureaucrat who'd never seen a day of real conflict. It was a punchline. But Walsh had been in the Corps long enough to know that call signs, the real ones, the ones that stuck, were never ironic. They were earned. They were forged in moments of extreme pressure and welded to a person's identity forever. They were shorthand for a story. And as he watched the old woman take another slow, deliberate sip of coffee, her eyes methodically scanning the room's occupants without seeming to move, a cold knot of certainty formed in his gut. Captain Keller, for all his swagger and his Ivy League degree, was about to learn that some stories weren't meant to be funny. He was about to find out what kind of furnace forges iron. The briefing began, and Captain Keller took the floor. He was the S2, the intelligence officer, and this was his show. He was sharp, articulate, and confident, moving through the slides with a practiced ease. The situation was dire. A high-value American engineer, a specialist in advanced drone guidance systems, had been snatched from a supposedly secure compound in a notoriously volatile region of North Africa. The group responsible was a new, highly aggressive splinter faction, and the window to get him back was closing fast. Keller presented a comprehensive intelligence picture, a mosaic of satellite imagery, signals intercepts, and drone surveillance. He pointed to a fortified compound in a remote desert village. "All indications are that the hostage, Mr. Thorne, is being held in the main structure here," Keller stated, circling the largest building with his laser pointer. "We have thermal imaging consistent with a single non-combatant captive in the sublevel. The disposition of enemy forces suggests a classic hardpoint defense. Our proposed ingress is a nighttime heliborne assault, landing teams Alpha and Bravo here." He indicated a dry riverbed, a wadi about 2 kilometers from the village, and moving under cover of darkness to establish a cordon. The plan was textbook. It was technologically sound, aggressive, and leveraged every asset the Marine Expeditionary Unit had at its disposal. Colonel Matheson, the MEU commander, listened intently from his seat at the head of the table, his face an unreadable mask of concentration. He let Keller finish his entire presentation, complete with threat assessments, casualty estimates, and extraction contingencies. The young lieutenants were nodding, impressed. The plan was clean. But Gunnery Sergeant Walsh felt that same cold knot tighten. It was too clean. The enemy they were facing wasn't known for being textbook. They were survivors, ghosts who knew the land in a way no satellite ever could. They thrived on an enemy's assumptions. As Keller concluded, a palpable sense of self-satisfaction settled over him. He had anticipated every question, covered every angle. He was ready. Colonel Matheson steepled his fingers, his gaze sweeping over his staff. Questions?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. A few officers asked for clarification on air support timing and rules of engagement, which Keller answered with crisp precision. He was in his element, the master of his data. Then, the colonel's eyes landed on the old woman at the end of the table. She hadn't moved, hadn't taken a single note. Her coffee mug sat empty beside her. "Ms. Reed," the colonel said, his tone shifting slightly, becoming less a commander addressing his staff and more a student asking a question of a revered professor. "You've reviewed the same intelligence package we have. We would all be grateful for your assessment." A flicker of annoyance crossed Captain Keller's face. It was a formality, he assumed, a courtesy extended to the civilian analyst from whatever obscure corner of the State Department she'd crawled out of. He braced himself for a long-winded academic take on the socio-economic factors driving the region's instability, something that would be utterly useless for the task at hand. Evelyn Reed pushed her chair back, the sound barely audible, and rose to her feet. She didn't walk to the podium or ask for the laser pointer. She simply stood by her chair, her small frame commanding an unexpected amount of space. The room grew quiet. Her eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, moved from the screen to Captain Keller, and she gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't deferential. It was an acknowledgement, like a master craftsman recognizing an apprentice's work. "Captain Keller," she began, her voice quiet, yet carrying to every corner of the soundproofed room. "Your data collection is impeccable. Your analysis of the enemy's technical capabilities is first-rate." Keller puffed up slightly at the praise. "However," she continued, and the word hung in the air, sharp and cold, "your plan will get every member of your assault team killed, and you will not recover the hostage." The silence in the room was no longer just quiet. It was absolute. The air crackled. Keller's face went from confident to flushed with anger in a heartbeat. "Ma'am, with all due respect," he began, his voice tight, "my analysis is based on the best intelligence we have. It's hard data, not—" "It's incomplete data," she interrupted, not unkindly, but with an authority that brooked no argument. "You see a dry riverbed? I see a seasonal sluice for the entire Jemez Plateau. The locals call it Wadi al-Maut, the River of Death. There was a storm in the mountains to the north yesterday. Your own meteorological annex mentions it. That water is on its way. In 3 hours, that wadi will be a 12-foot deep torrent of mud and rock. Your teams wouldn't be landing in cover. They'd be landing in a death trap." She paused, letting the information sink in. Walsh watched Keller's jaw clench. He was already scrambling, mentally checking his data, trying to find the flaw in her logic. "As for the compound," Evelyn continued, her gaze shifting back to the map on the screen. "You're right. It's fortified. It's meant to be. It's a distraction, a honeypot. The faction leader, Ibrahim al-Zahir, is many things, but he is not a fool. He knows we have eyes in the sky. He knows we look for heat signatures and fortified walls. He's giving you exactly what he wants you to see." She took a step forward, her movements economical and precise. She pointed not with a laser, but with her index finger, her hand as steady as a rock. "The village is old, very old. It was a Roman outpost 2,000 years ago. Before that, it was a Carthaginian trading post. It's built on a system of qanats, subterranean aqueducts used for irrigation. They are not on any modern map. They are cool, shielded, and have dozens of hidden entrances and exits throughout the village." Her finger traced a line on the screen that wasn't there. "Mr. Thorne isn't in the sublevel of the main building. He's being held here." She tapped a spot near the village well. "And here." She tapped another spot near the communal bakery. "In the qanat system. The heat signature you detected is from a generator placed there deliberately to mimic a human presence. The guards you see patrolling the compound walls are the B team, the local recruits. The real guards, Zahir's elite, are dressed as civilians. They are the baker, the old man sipping tea in the cafe, the woman weaving a rug in that doorway. They are watching the entire village, and they've been doing it their whole lives." The room was frozen. This wasn't analysis. It was testimony. She spoke with the casual certainty of someone describing their own neighborhood. Captain Keller, for the first time, looked utterly lost. His entire, carefully constructed intelligence picture was shattering around him. How could you possibly know this? He stammered, the words catching in his throat. None of this is in any report. It's not in the databases. Evelyn Reed's pale blue eyes met his. For the first time, Walsh saw a flicker of something in them, a deep, ancient weariness mixed with a glint of hard-won steel. I know the baker's name is Yusef, and he cheats at cards. I know the old man in the cafe is his uncle, and he lost 2 fingers on his right hand to a British landmine in the 1950s. I know the woman weaving the rug has a daughter in Paris she hasn't seen in 10 years. And I know that the entrance to the deepest part of the qanat system is hidden beneath the 3rd oven in Yusef's bakery, the one he only uses for the morning flatbread. She let that last detail settle in the suffocating silence. I know this, Captain, because 30 years ago, I spent 6 months in that village, mapping that qanat system while posing as an archaeologist's assistant. My mission was to place the very sensors that allowed your drones to get the SIGINT you're relying on today. A collective, silent gasp seemed to pass through the room. The smirks on the faces of the junior officers had long since vanished, replaced by masks of stunned disbelief. Captain Keller looked as though he'd been struck. He opened his mouth, then closed it. The pieces were clicking into place for everyone. Each detail she provided a hammer blow against their assumptions. The quiet old woman, the historian, the grandmotherly analyst. It was all a facade, or rather, not a facade, but an echo of a life lived in the shadows, a life of immense consequence and total anonymity. Colonel Matheson finally broke the silence. He hadn't moved, but his eyes were now fixed on Keller, and they were as hard as flint. "Captain," he said, his voice dangerously low, "it seems your intelligence picture was, as Ms. Reed so generously put it, incomplete. You have her input. You have 1 hour to present a new plan, one that doesn't get my Marines drowned or ambushed. Dismissed." The word was a gunshot in the quiet room. The officers filed out, their movements stiff, their faces a mixture of awe and shame. They avoided looking at Keller, and they gave Evelyn Reed a wide, respectful berth, as if she were suddenly radiating an invisible heat. Keller remained, rooted to the spot in front of the screen, his perfect plan now in digital ruins. Gunnery Sergeant Walsh stayed behind as well, pretending to check the room's security logs. He watched as Evelyn walked slowly over to the coffee station and refilled her mug. She moved with the same quiet deliberation as before, but now everyone saw it for what it was, not the slowness of age, but the profound calm of absolute competence. She knew she had just dismantled a man's career, or at least his pride, but there was no triumph in her posture. There was only a quiet resolve. This wasn't about winning an argument, it was about saving lives. Captain Keller finally seemed to find his legs. He walked over to her, his head bowed, his swagger completely gone. He looked like a chastened schoolboy. "Ma'am," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Ms. Reed, I apologize for my assumptions, for my comments." He didn't need to specify which ones. She turned to face him, her expression softening slightly. "There's nothing to apologize for, Captain. You are a product of your training. It's good training. It teaches you to trust the data, the technology. It's a vital skill." She took a sip of her coffee. "But it's only half the picture. Technology can tell you the what. It rarely tells you the why. It can't tell you about a father's pride or a village's loyalty or the bitterness of a forgotten promise. That's the human terrain. It's messy and you can't learn it from a screen." She looked back at the map still glowing on the wall. "Your new plan," she said, her voice shifting back into an advisory tone. "Forget the heliborne assault. It's too loud, too overt. You'll need a smaller team. 2, maybe 3 operators. They won't go in through the wadi. They'll go in from the south, over the Jebel Ridge. There's a goat path there, used by smugglers. It's not on your map, but it will put them on the high ground overlooking the village before dawn." She was giving him the solution, piece by piece, not to humiliate him further, but to teach him, to build him back up from the wreckage of his own arrogance. "Your window is the dawn call to prayer. Zahar's men are devout, but they are also men. Their guard is lowest then. Yusef the baker will be at the mosque. That's when your team enters the qanat. They will have less than 15 minutes. Keller was now grabbing a notepad, scribbling furiously, his mind racing to keep up. He had gone from being the expert to the student in the space of 10 minutes. Gunnery Sergeant Walsh finally understood. The colonel knew exactly who she was. This whole briefing hadn't just been about planning a mission. It had been a lesson, orchestrated by a commander who understood that the most valuable weapon his officers could possess was humility. He had brought in a living legend, a ghost from the Cold War's darkest corners, not just for her knowledge, but to remind these young, brilliant, tech-savvy warriors that the world was older, deeper, and more complex than their sensors could ever reveal. He was reminding them that the call sign Iron Lady wasn't a joke. It was a title. It was a warning. It had been earned in places like this village, in silence and solitude, with stakes that were absolute. It was a name given to someone who could not be bent, could not be broken, and whose will had been tempered into something harder than steel. As Evelyn Reed quietly explained the extraction route, talking about which families would offer sanctuary and which would betray them for a bag of silver, Walsh felt a profound sense of reverence. He wasn't just watching an analyst brief an officer. He was watching a master pass on her art, ensuring that the lessons she had paid for in blood and isolation would not be lost to the coming generation.